She was 66 years old, twice my age, and the first thing she said to me across a restaurant table was a question no one had asked me in years. Not what do you do? Not what are you looking for? She looked at me, calm, no performance, no apology for the situation she'd been dropped into, and she said, "What are you still waiting for?" I had plans that evening. A friend's birthday at a bar across town, a group message I'd already replied to, a cab I was supposed to book at 9. I never booked it. I canceled the plans before she finished her first glass of wine. This is how that happened. My name is Daniel Howe. I am 33 years old. I inspect buildings for a living. I find the cracks before they become catastrophes. I have been told this says something about my personality. It probably does. I am not particularly romantic. I'm also not closed off. I fall somewhere in the cautious middle, the kind of person who likes someone and then produces 12 reasons why the timing is wrong. The circumstances aren't right. The situation is more complicated than it appears. I am very good at identifying fault lines. I apply this skill everywhere, which is both professionally useful and personally inconvenient. The woman who arranged the dinner was my Aunt Carol. She meant well. She always means well. That is the most dangerous quality a person can have. She called me on a Thursday evening and said she wanted me to have dinner with a friend of hers, a woman named Vivienne. There was a pause after she said the name, the kind of pause that is doing a lot of work. Then Carol added, "She's a widow. She's 66. Just be kind to her, Daniel. She's had a hard few years." I said yes because I didn't know how to say no to Aunt Carol without triggering a 3-week conversation about my emotional availability. I want to be honest about my intentions. I wore a clean shirt. I drove to the restaurant. I planned to be kind, have one drink, make a reasonable effort, and leave by 9 to make the birthday party. I had no expectations. I was doing a favor for my aunt. That was the plan. The restaurant was Italian, small, the kind with candles that are actual candles, low and warm, casting everything in a softened version of itself, and the smell of garlic and rosemary and something buttery rising from the kitchen. The murmur of other conversations around me, the scrape of a chair somewhere behind me, someone laughing at a table near the wall. The kind of place where the evening feels like it has weight to it before you've done anything worth weighing. Vivienne Park was already seated when I arrived. She was not what I expected. I don't know exactly what I had expected. Someone fragile, perhaps. Someone performing a gentle public grief. Someone grateful for the company in a way that made the whole thing feel small and safe and easy to leave. She was none of those things. She was wearing a dark blue dress and a jacket she'd draped over the back of her chair. And she had a small silver pen tucked into the jacket's breast pocket, the slim kind, the kind you find in a stationery shop that sells things people actually use rather than display. Her hair was silver white, cut close to her face, and she was reading the menu with the focused attention of someone who had already decided and was simply occupying herself until it became appropriate to say so. She looked up when I approached. No flicker of assessment. No performance of warmth. Just a direct, unhurried look that made you feel she had already formed a provisional opinion of you and was willing to revise it in either direction, and was not particularly anxious about which way it went. "You must be Daniel," she said. "I must be," I said. She smiled at that, not widely, just the corner of her mouth, like she was filing the answers somewhere. I sat down. We talked for 2 hours. She had been a book editor for 31 years and mentioned this the way people mention a weather pattern, something that had simply been true for a long time and didn't require decoration. Her husband had died 4 years ago. She mentioned this the same way, not with armor around it, not to manage my reaction, just because it was part of the geography of her life and she saw no reason to navigate around it. She had a daughter in Edinburgh. A standing Thursday lunch she had maintained for 22 years with 2 women she'd known since graduate school. A habit, she said this casually, in passing, as if it were an unremarkable detail, of subscribing to newsletters on obscure topics and then matching them to people she found interesting. I found that last detail unusual. I filed it without comment. And then, near the end of the first glass of wine, she set it down, looked at me across the table, and said, "What are you still waiting for?" Not rhetorically. She meant it as an actual question. The kind you only ask when you already suspect the answer and want to see if the other person knows it too. I opened my mouth and then closed it. I said, "What do you mean?" "You're 33, she said. "You inspect structures for a living. You find the fault lines before anyone else notices them. You seem like a very careful person." She tilted her head slightly. "I'm curious what you're being careful about." That sentence did something quiet to the room. I said something deflecting, something about professional habits bleeding outward, the way sustained caution reorganizes itself around every part of a life. She listened to all of it. She nodded when I finished. She asked me something else entirely, and we moved on, and an hour later the evening ended with a handshake and a pleasant enough goodbye outside the restaurant, the cold air sharp after the warmth inside, her silver pen catching the light as she pulled her jacket closed. But I heard the question. It followed me all the way to the car. I texted Marcus on the way out of the car park. "Running late. Go without me." I sat in the car for a few minutes without starting the engine. Nothing dramatic had happened. I had eaten good food and talked to a woman who was twice my age, and she had asked me one question I didn't have a satisfying answer for. That was all. I told myself it was just an interesting evening. That interesting and important were different things, that she was 66 and a widow and my aunt's friend, and this was, by any sensible accounting, a situation with no road out of it. I told myself these things with a certain thoroughness. The thoroughness that tends to indicate you have already noticed the argument isn't working. I drove home. I made tea. I sat at the kitchen table and thought about a question I hadn't been asked in years. I have poor survival instincts around women who ask the right question. Aunt Carol called the following Tuesday. "How did it go?" "It went well," I said. "She's interesting." A pause. "Interesting. Yes." Another pause, the deliberate kind, the kind Carol uses when she is being strategic about something. "She asked about you, you know. She called me, said you were someone she'd like to talk to again." I set my mug down too carefully. "I may have given her your number," Carol said. "I hope that's all right, Daniel," Vivienne texted the following Thursday. No greeting, no preamble. I found an article on cracking patterns in Victorian-era brick that I thought you might find interesting. Then a link. I read the article. Then I read it again. Then I texted back, "You subscribe to a structural engineering newsletter." She replied, "I subscribe to 19 newsletters. I match them to people I'm thinking about." I looked at my phone for a long time after that. Then I typed, "Why are you thinking about me?" She left me unread for 5 hours. Then, "You asked what I do in the evenings. Now you know." This was not an answer. It was also exactly the right one. I looked at it for a long time and then put my phone face down on the table, which resolved nothing and felt accurate. The third time I saw her was at her apartment. She had mentioned, very casually, that she needed to hang a large painting and was waiting for someone with a proper level. I had a level. I also had no compelling reason to say no, and several unconvincing ones. And the unconvincing ones lost, and I told myself this was a practical favor and nothing else. Her apartment smelled like paper and something warm, dried herbs, old books. Something that had been lived in well, and it looked like a place assembled over decades, each object present because it meant something rather than because it filled a gap. Bookshelves on every wall, double-stacked in places. A reading chair by the window that had been sat in 10,000 times. A lamp in the corner throwing a pool of amber light that made everything inside it look considered. The painting was a large 19th century botanical print, framed in dark wood. Her husband had bought it in Paris, she said. They had nearly not gone. She'd had a difficult year and kept saying the timing wasn't right, that they'd go later, that later would be easier. He had booked the tickets without asking. I held the painting against the wall while she stood back and looked. She had the silver pen out, absently, her fingers tightening once around it as she studied the placement. Left, she said. A little more. Stop. I marked the wall. Found the studs. Set the hooks. When it was done, we stood back together and looked at it. She was quiet for a long moment. I could hear the street outside, faintly, and somewhere further back in the apartment a clock, the warm smell of the place, the light from the corner lamp. Her standing next to me, with her arms loosely folded, studying the botanical print the way she studied everything, without hurry, without needing to fill the silence. Then she said, "Almost not taking something is often the thing you remember most." She wasn't looking at me when she said it. She was looking at the painting, but I understood that it wasn't entirely about the trip to Paris. She looked at the pen in her hand, put it back in her jacket pocket. "Thank you," she said, "for the level." "Any time," I said. She looked at me briefly when I said that. Just for a second, like she was checking something. I drove home and thought about a man I had never met, a painting bought on a trip they nearly didn't take, and a woman who remembered the almost as if it mattered as much as the thing itself. The fourth thing was not something she did. It was something Marcus said about 3 weeks later. I had mentioned, carefully, casually, as if it wasn't particularly significant, that I'd been spending some time with someone recently. He asked what she was like. I said she was direct, that she was interesting, that she had a way of talking that made you feel you'd said more than you'd intended, and that this somehow didn't bother you. He gave me a very particular look. "How old is she?" I paused. He laughed, not unkindly. 8 years, he said. "I've known you 8 years. You've never talked about anyone like this, not in the way you're currently not talking about her." "I haven't said much at all," I said. "No," he said. "You haven't had to. You're doing the thing you do, the very careful not saying anything thing." I told him he was projecting. He was not projecting. I knew it in the car on the way home. I told myself it didn't matter, that the situation was what it was, that there was nowhere sensible for this to go. I was very good at this kind of argument. I had been winning it against myself for nearly 2 months. I was beginning to suspect the argument was the problem. The 5th time, we barely talked. She had suggested coffee on a Saturday morning at a cafe near her building. The air that morning had a particular quality. November cold, wet pavement. The light, flat and low. The kind that makes a city look like a long exposure photograph of itself. The cafe was small and warm inside, the windows fogged at the corners, the smell of espresso and something warm from behind the counter. We ordered. We sat at a table by the window. For a while, we just watched the street. I was aware of her in a way I had been slowly allowing, over the previous weeks, to become harder to argue down. The way she held her cup with both hands, the way she read a room without appearing to. The silver pen, always in her jacket pocket. I thought, she has had a whole life before this moment. A marriage. A grief she carried for years and then, slowly, learned to set down. A long career built on other people's language, decades of choices I hadn't been alive to watch her make. I thought about what it must mean to be on the other side of all of that, to have loved someone completely and lost him, and still be sitting in a cafe on a Saturday morning, watching a street, present. I thought, I am 33 years old, and I do not know what I am doing here. I thought, I don't want to leave. The traffic outside moved quietly past. A woman walked by with a dog. A couple stood across the street consulting a phone. The ordinary weight of an ordinary Saturday, and the two of us sitting in the middle of it, not saying the thing. There is a specific kind of silence between two people who are both thinking the same sentence, and neither of them is ready to say it yet. I had not sat in that silence with anyone in a long time. I had forgotten how loud it was. She set her cup down. She looked out at the street. Without turning to me, she said, I told Carol this was a kindness arrangement, something to make her feel useful. I said, was it? She turned then. Looked at me the way she always looked at me, direct, unhurried, without any management of impression. Not anymore, she said. We were walking back along the pavement when she stopped. Not dramatically. She simply stopped, mid-step, and I took 2 more strides before I realized and turned back to face her. She was looking at a point somewhere past my shoulder. Then, she looked at me directly. I want to say something, she said, and I need you to let me finish before you respond. I waited. I am 66 years old. I was married for 31 years to a man I loved without qualification. I have a daughter who is 38, who is older than you. I have a life that is full, and on most days I'm grateful for it. She paused. The silver pen was in her hand, not writing anything, just held. But I think about you in a specific way, not the way I think about Carol's other acquaintances, or about people I find interesting and then forget by Tuesday. I think about you in a way that has become inconvenient and that I have decided, at my age, I'm not going to be quiet about. She looked at the pen. Then, at me. I don't know what that means for either of us. I'm not asking you to answer that. I'm just not willing to be careful about it anymore. She stopped. She waited. I said, you don't have to name it. Whatever this is, you don't have to. She looked at me steadily. I know I don't have to, she said. That's not why I'm saying it. Something in my chest shifted. Not dramatically, just enough. The kind of shift that isn't loud and doesn't announce itself, and that you understand, once it has happened, was always going to happen. I thought about all the things I had told myself over the preceding weeks. That the situation was what it was. That the gap in our ages was a fact that did not bend to wanting. That interesting was not the same as important. I had said all of these things to myself with some conviction. Standing on that pavement, with her looking at me and neither of us pretending anymore, every single one of them collapsed at once. I thought about the question she'd asked me the first night. What are you still waiting for? I had not had a good answer then. I thought I might have one now. I said, the night we met I canceled plans to stay. I've been finding reasons to cancel things ever since. She waited. Because of you, I said. That's the only reason. She held my gaze for 1 second longer than felt safe. Then she looked down at the pen in her hand, like a woman who had just realized her own composure had classified information in it. I reached out and put my hand over hers. Carefully, not a statement, a question. A pause in the middle of a sentence to see if the sentence should continue. She looked at our hands. Then she looked up at me. She laughed, just once, small and completely real. The kind that comes from a woman who has been given permission to put something down. We stood on the pavement for a while after that. Neither of us appeared certain what the correct next step was. I think this was the right response. "I've never done this before," she said eventually. "This exact version of this. Nor have I." "You're sure?" "I'm a building inspector," I said. "I check for cracks. I would have found one by now." She looked at me. Then she pressed her lips together against a smile. "That is a deeply strange thing to say." "Yes," I said. "It worked, though." "It worked," I agreed. 3 months later, she corrected the grammar in a birthday card I was writing for my mother. I let her. It was better for it. We were not loud about what we were. We didn't need to be. She had no patience for performance. I had no interest in announcement. We were simply present to each other, in the specific, quiet way that is not interesting to describe, and is, it turns out, exactly what I had been waiting for. 8 months after that, I came home from a long job, 11 hours in a Victorian terrace, with 5 years of hidden damage painted over and quietly waiting. And she was reading in the armchair when I came through the door. She didn't look up from her book. "There's soup on the hob," she said. "Eat before you do anything else." I put my bag down. I sat on the arm of her chair. She still didn't look up. I said, "Thank you." "For the soup?" "For all of it." She went still, not dramatically, just still. Then she reached up and put her hand over mine, briefly, where it rested on the back of the chair. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Nothing about us had changed, except everything had. 2 years later, when people ask how we met, Vivienne says, "My friend thought she was doing us a kindness." She was right, eventually, I say. She asked me a question the first night. I've been answering it ever since. Her daughter told her, gently and not unkindly, that it was a little unusual, being with someone so much younger. Vivienne said, "It's only unusual if you keep counting." It felt late, finding this. Late in the best possible way. If you've ever met someone who made you realize you'd been postponing something that actually mattered, leave a comment below and tell me what that felt like. And if you think someone you know needed to hear this story today, send it to them. Subscribe if you want to hear more.